And we begin tonight's program with Sue Hester, somewhat controversial San Francisco attorney who focuses on zoning and affordable housing issues. Accurately or not, she's been characterized as the leading anti-growth and anti-development advocate in San Francisco. Her present concern is the lack of media coverage of the San Francisco Planning Department's efforts to, in her words, cover most of South Market with huge towers for very upscale housing.
That's one of them, yes.
You don't mind being called controversial?
Oh, I love being called controversial.
Okay. Now, for many people who are newer to the city, you come from the tradition of the great freeway battles.
That's Sue Bierman.
Well,
I wasn't quite there.
The tradition is that this was the first time that citizens stood up to a planning department or a bureaucracy. Freeway, well, you describe it.
Well, it was before I came to the city, but the freeway battles were in the end of the 50s and throughout the 60s. And we had a revolt, and Sue Bierman, who was a former planning commissioner and former supervisor, and my friend, was one of the active people. And they said, you can't do this, because they planned on wrecking Golden Gate Park, having freeways along the waterfront. And people said, that isn't the way we want to live in San Francisco. And it was a very effective citizen movement that involved the Board of Supervisors and local legislators, and they stopped freeways. And it was unheard of in the United States.
That was a time when the state of California was on a huge freeway explosion. Pat Brown had started that, and it was wherever they wanted to go, they could go.
Right.
And take houses, as they were planning to do here, take the entire panhandle to basically connect the main highway 101 with the Golden Gate Bridge.
Right. They were going to go along the waterfront in the marina.
All
the way. Yeah, it was going to be the waterfront freeway. And the only part of it that was built was the part up to Broadway, and it was stopped there.
Now.
And then it was torn down.
And it was, well, it was torn down because nature got angry at the freeway.
1979.
And an earthquake damaged it. So this is why I bring this up. This is the tradition you come out of. This is a time when citizens could say no to what was the all-pervasive power of the bureaucracy.
And about that time, there came to pass in San Francisco a planning commission. I mean, there didn't used to be planning departments or planning commissions. That was a relatively young thing that happened end of the 50s, beginning of the 60s, and San Francisco was one of them. And there started being vehicles to address land use issues formally, and it wasn't just a building permit issue. So there was a vehicle, and there was a very powerful redevelopment agency, which San Francisco spawned not only a freeway revolt, but a redevelopment revolt. And again, those were happening before I came to the city. They stopped redevelopment in the Western Addition, big battles on South of Market. The leading cases in redevelopment law came out of San Francisco. They came out of San Francisco. Whoops. You're going to have to stop and retape, and I apologize.
That's right. We're gonna.
I didn't. I apologize. I know
keep
better
on
than
going.
In San Francisco, there was a revolt against the freeways, and then it led to a revolt against redevelopment because massive amounts of people were being displaced, and they were the Japanese community and the African American community in the Western Addition, and that led to the battles in the South of Market, where we lost a lot of housing that was basically for the seamen, the people who worked on the waterfront. And so the leading cases in redevelopment law on dislocated populations are actually San Francisco cases. So there's a good history in San Francisco.
Okay, let's fast forward. Well, no, we're gonna fast forward to the time when your main concern were high-rise office buildings in downtown San Francisco, and that led to one of the first quotas of about 950,000 square feet a year. Am I right?
Right.
And that's still in place.
That's still in place. What was going on was the third wave was the zoning wave, and that started in 1971 with the Duskin Initiative, which was a height limit, imposed a height limit on the city if it would have passed that was 40 feet. And if you wanted to go higher than that, you had to have a vote. But that built over time to 1986 when Prop M was passed. And in the meantime, the planning department, because they were tired of citizens, me and other people, saying they needed to regulate downtown, they did their own planning process. The downtown plan, Dianne Feinstein was mayor. It was a very responsible Feinstein-type planning commission. And they did the studies that said that the amount of office space that would be absorbed historically is around 1 million square feet a year. It was actually 950,000 square feet. And so we said, that's how much you can have. And so what happened was the Planning Commission legitimized the issue by studying it and coming up with this number, and we put it on the ballot along with what is currently still talked about, the Prop M priority policies, saying these are the policies that should guide development in San Francisco. And what happened in 1986 was we said office development is limited to that which the market will absorb, which is 950,000 square feet. And yeah, they approved a lot of office buildings right before that, and they had to be amortized over a period of time. And guess what?
And of course they get cumulative. If you don't use up all 950,000, you can add it to the next year and so on in bad times, bad economic times.
And what we found out is the market isn't even that high.
Well, remember that at the time, there was a different tax structure. You could build empty buildings, as they did in Houston, and get such a great accelerated tax write-off. That's why they were building these empty buildings. Some say that your efforts, therefore, prevented the city from having a bunch of empty buildings.
Oh, one of the people who said so was Walter Shorenstein. I mean, he said that. It was in the paper. I mean, I didn't prompt him to say it. I don't talk to Walter Shorenstein. But he basically said after Texas collapsed, the office market in Texas, Boston, New York, and I'm missing some other cities, they all collapsed simultaneously because the law changed and they literally had empty buildings all over the place, and the office market collapsed in all of those cities, everywhere except San Francisco.
1986 is when the law was changed.
And so it was because we had stopped the insanity in San Francisco. People build buildings because, not necessarily because they're needed, but because they make money making them, because there's all this money floating around. We had a lot of oil money around at that point too.
That's correct.
And so that was chasing investments. And
but now I think today's market, and this brings us now to the Business Times article about you. You said that here are a whole group of buildings that have been approved over the last 10 years, 15 years?
Some of them 20 years.
Within the 950,000 quota.
That haven't built.
That are not being built.
And so,
because if I may interrupt, that because now they don't, and the financiers, the banks will not finance these unless they have some pretty good tenants or it makes economic sense.
Yeah, and when we started, I've been pushing for them to give a list. Takes a while, you know. You could a list of buildings that have been approved and the office allocations. They're supposed to keep it. That's part of the law. The law said they have to give a list every year of how much space there is, how many buildings are coming through. And the planning department just stopped doing it. Said, we don't think it's worth a while our time. So they stopped doing this. But when they finally gave a list, and I looked, I said, some of these buildings were approved in 1988. They were. And they reactivated themselves in 1998. And this is 2007. And they were using environmental documents and environmental analysis that was at 10 years old at least, and 20 years old sometimes.
But if you get, even if you were successful of getting some of these buildings removed from the list, because the square footage is still there, allowed, there would be other developers that would come in to replace them.
Yeah, and it's a question of does the Planning Commission have the right and the public to look at a building at that particular location in 2007 eyes? Some of these buildings are right next to the Transbay. There's been a bit of a change around Transbay in the past 20 years. And so how does this relate to what our vision of that area is? In fact, two of the more controversial buildings that were on that list are half a block from the Transbay boundaries on different streets.
Well, let's, okay, that's fine. Let's go now to the reality. When you look at what's happened, in fact, I always wondered when we had other developers here, including the developer One Rincon Hill just recently, What is Sue Hester thinking, which is why I wanted you on the program? You look, what you were fighting against were high-rises. The very nature of high-rises, casting shadows, changing neighborhoods. So
why did I let that one go through?
How are all these? I mean, there's 7,000 residential units there. There's more than just that tower. There are many towers being built, residential towers.
Right, and the problem is there's only one of me, and there's lots of developers. And right now, the biggest issue that I'm dealing with is the eastern neighborhoods, which is the
we'll
village,
get to next time.
Okay, but the issue is housing for people in the city, and Rincon Hill went through three different changes. One was back when Dean Macros was originally the planning director, hot on the heels of the downtown plan. The second one was a negotiated agreement when Gerald Green was planning director. The third one was when Dean Macros came back again. And the vision became, let's build these big towers on Rincon Hill. There was pushback. There was pushback from the people who live in that area. There are people that live on Rincon Hill in lower buildings. I mean, 15, 20-story buildings instead of 60-story buildings. And people, you know, we were not able to get the Board of Supervisors to pay adequate attention. What I want to say to you is, one Rincon is just one of two. There's two of them.
I know, but that's
and there's eight more.
There's several more down in South Beach. There's several more up
no,
on Market. There's
You're missing all the ones that are right in that immediate area.
What I'm saying to you is, when you fought the battle for office towers, did you exempt residential towers in your mind?
No, the battle was not about height. The battle was about space.
Well,
the battle was about oversaturation of office market. What you deal with is what is the most lucrative use. That's the most threatening. If you had asked...
You mean because of environmental impacts, you're less concerned about
no,
huge residential towers than office towers?
No, because they buy up land and bid up the price. And the most lucrative use historically in San Francisco was office space. And the office developers would set the market because they would be calculating, am I going to get $55
But that's not the case anymore.
No. The economy changed when San Francisco shifted from being predominantly a headquarters city. You know, it was an evolving process. But it evolved out of that in the past 10 years.
But I guess what I'm asking you is, okay, and your analysis is correct. Does Sue Hester object to the Vancouver model for San Francisco? I mean, but do you see them as significant as office towers, or at least they're providing housing, though?
No, they are not meeting the housing goals of San Francisco.
You object then to the resident tower explosion?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
Do they have the same environmental impacts?
They have worse environmental impacts because what we're doing is we are saying we're not going to meet the demand for housing for the people who work in San Francisco. The people who work in San Francisco, a two-family household median income for that, if you work in the city, is about $80,000 a year.
And I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to have you back next week, and we're going to pick it up from where we are, okay?
We went through the entire thing?
Well, we're finished with the first. We're going to have another discussion about this because we're just beginning now to get to where I wanted to talk about. Sue Hester will be back with us next week for the conclusion of this discussion, but next, Glenn Dickey.